So I just came across this report from NREL about the cost of floating photovoltaic systems compared to land-based photovoltaic systems. And at first I thought this was complete nonsense. Why would you want to put a photovoltaic system floating on the water? But it turns out there's actually a couple good reasons for this. If you live in a hot state and you have a reservoir, that reservoir is going to lose a significant amount of water every year just due to evaporation from the sun. So if you put solar panels on top of the water, not only do you get electricity from the sunlight hitting the solar panels, but you also prevent that sunlight from hitting the water and evaporating it. And there's actually even a third benefit, which is the water, which is typically cooler than the land, actually cools down the backside of the solar panels and they become more efficient because when these things heat up, they start to lose efficiency. So the water is a kind of natural cooling from the bottom side that gives you a slight edge on efficiency compared to a land-based solar system. And then like distant third and fourth reasons are the land is more available. So say you're in an area where land is very expensive, the land on top of the water is maybe not being utilized for anything else. So you might be able to get a better deal on leasing that land. And typically lakes are not shaded by surrounding trees and buildings and stuff. So you probably get slightly more sunlight. The negatives, of course, it costs more because you have to kind of anchor this thing. Overall, there's a little bit less light captured because they say in this report that you have to tilt the panels at 10 degrees instead of the typical 33 degrees. Doesn't explain why. I'm not really sure if this is 100% necessary, but typically less tilt means you are not getting as much direct sunlight depending on your latitude. Slightly less captured, and it turns out the cooling effect is less important than the tilt effect. So when you combine the two, you still get slightly less energy generated than a land-based solar PV installation. But I just wanted to go through this and show some of the interesting things that they, and really quickly, so it's a pretty long document. I think it's like 20 something pages. The short summary is what I just said, and they found after all their calculations that the cost of the system is about 25% more than a land-based system. This is for a 10 megawatts, which is roughly a $10 million system. The final levelized cost of energy is about 20% higher than for a ground-mounted system. 25% more to build the thing, and then you get slightly improved efficiency over the lifetime to make it a overall cost of energy at 20%. And I think this has to do with probably the cost of the land. Yeah, so they first start off by saying like the motivation for this study is that that floating solar is a thing. In fact, there's something like cumulative installed capacity is 2 gigawatts. It looks like, 2 gigawatts, 2.6 gigawatts in the world, mostly in China. And then they go on to say like, oh, here are some of the largest installed solar plants in the US. There's one in Texas, which is pretty close to me. This is just under 1 megawatt. So very cool. I don't think these are tilted at 10%. These look like a little bit more than 10 degrees. I don't know. What do you think? Looks like more than 10 degree tilt. But anyway, this thing is huge. It's massive. It does take a little bit more space than the normal ones. There's like a lot of space between them. And it doesn't cover the entire lake, but it protects a good amount of it from evaporating. And this turns out to be a nursery where they grow all these plants, and there's like all these greenhouses, and they all get powered by solar now. It's called Altman plants. So if you ever see these Altman plants, give them some business because they're doing a good thing and saving the environment. Look at how big this place is though. These are all greenhouses, and they have so many greenhouses growing, and then this is their gigantic 1 megawatt floating solar array. So yeah, they could have probably gone about double that, but I guess I think they wanted it sized just under 1 megawatt for some reasons that I'll talk about in a second. This is the largest one in the US as of 2021 in Healdsburg, California. They built this giant floating array on top of a water treatment reservoir. They were saying in this article that one of the benefits is, of course, the evaporation, and another one is that it prevents algae from growing inside this reservoir. So because algae needs sunlight to grow, if they cover this whole thing, this is the old photo, so you can't see it. I kind of looked at it and found that this whole part is this part of the lake here. And basically the entire thing is now covered in solar. That one's more than 4 times larger than the one we saw in Texas. And yeah, so it's a significant help in reducing the amount of algae that they have to process when they're treating this water. And then here's the other one, in New Jersey. They have a lake that is covered by how much? 4.4 megawatts of solar. Pretty massive. They say this is also like a recreational lake, so there's a little bit of downside here where it stops plants and animals from growing in that area of the lake, but it's not, it looks like it's only a small portion of the lake that's covered by the solar panels. And then this thing also powers a waste treatment facility. Okay, so that's what they look like. And then this thing goes on to talk about like some of the considerations that you need to look at when you're building a floating solar array versus a land-based one. They are saying in most designs you have the inverter and transformers on the land, and the only component you have on the water is this combiner box that combines all the voltages coming out of these panels and then moves it to the inverter, and then it goes to the grid. I think we could see it here. I think these ones along the edges are all, I think this is where they combine. And then they're showing the 2 different types of anchoring. One is anchoring underwater. Here's one anchoring. I guess there's 3 types. There's underwater anchoring with an elastic line. So this thing has to stretch to compensate for the water level rising and lowering. And then there's the bank anchor or these helical screw bank anchors. So there's like different methods of anchoring it. I think typically they use this one, but the New Jersey one used anchored to the bank. When you have more fluctuation in the water level, this becomes more difficult. And then they go into some interesting stuff about the assumptions that they made to do this calculation and how they got all the numbers. They basically talked to a bunch of vendors who build these kinds of things and asked them about what the cost should be. And they came out with this comparison where ground mount, the cost fully installed is like $1.03 per watt, and floating PV is around 1.29, with the biggest difference being this green 11 cents versus 37 cents per watt. And that's the structural balance of system. That's essentially the floating part that you have to add. A lot of the other stuff is pretty similar, and in the whole doc they explain why some of these are different. Like install and labor cost is a little bit less for the floating one because they said they needed less heavy equipment or something like that to do it. Okay, so this is cool. So this one, they show the economy of scale of the systems as you go from a 2 megawatt up to 5, 10, and then 50 megawatts. So a megawatt is 1,000,000 watts, and then each watt is $1.68. So this system, to figure out how much the whole system costs, you just multiply this by this. So 2 million times 1.68, so it's about $3 million for this system. 50 million times 1.05, so it's about $50 million for this system. So that gives you an idea. And you can see the big difference that comes down is these electrical and structural BOS. The balance of system is just like the non-solar cell parts of the system. I think this is typical, like the electrical components get cheaper as you get bigger. But this one is kind of interesting to me. Like the float things, from all the ones I saw, the floats look pretty modular. So I'm not really sure why the cost goes down so much when you go to bigger and bigger ones. Maybe they have a different style of floats, but in the document they were just saying that it has to do with like the size of your order. So if you order more of these, you get a discount. And I don't know if that's 100% guaranteed to be true, because I think it should follow the same principle that they use to calculate the cost of solar panels. See, when you order more solar panels, the cost of each one is still the same. So why is that? Like, why do you get a discount for ordering in bulk of these but not for these? And that's because the whole economics of building solar that I heard about 10 years ago was people were saying 10 years ago, right now it's not sustainable. The price is not economical to build these. But once we build more and more and more, and there's bigger volumes, they can build bigger, more efficient factories, then the prices for everybody will drop down and we will reach this like magical $1 per watt goal where it becomes economical to build these. So they're saying that now that there's a lot of solar being built, the price is very low and you get these economies of scale for any size project. So I think the same should be true for this. If there were enough of these being built in the world, then everybody would get the lower price. And it's not because an individual project has more need, it's because the overall demand is higher and they can just build more efficient factories and have them running 24/7 to give everybody cheaper prices. So I hope that's true, because at this cost, it's almost the same as the land-based, which is really cool. And then this is just the cost of building the thing. This doesn't even bring into account the benefits that you get for reducing the evaporation in the reservoirs and things like that. And then these are just some more caveats about their calculation. This is how they do the calculation. And then this is pretty cool. So here it goes through all the inputs they have to the formula, and you can see what's different between ground mounted and floating in a typical system. So this is for a $10 million system. I guess it's about 13 million for the floating version. This is the interesting part. The annual energy yield is almost the same. So this is what they were saying is going to be slightly less. And there's a note here, slightly less, 5% lower yield because of the tilt. And then that is slightly offset by the cooling effect, but they were saying there's no conclusive data on that. And I'm still not sure why the tilt has to be that way. A lot of the things are very similar. And then at the end of the day, without solar credits and with solar credits, I'm not sure if these solar credits are still available. This is 3 years ago. The number at the end is pretty close. And like they said, about 20% more expensive on LCOE for the floating version. The conclusion is basically that it's slightly more expensive. Okay, so the cool thing about this LCOE metric, the reason why they go through all these calculations to give you some dollar value, this is what they're saying once everything's said and done, once you put all the factors into account, and you can see it takes into account like your debt, interest rate, and tax rate, and like operation and maintenance. All these things are supposed to be baked into this one number. And so once you boil down all the costs of making energy, LCOE is a good way to compare cost of two different types of energy. And it would even work if you're comparing like solar to gas or solar to nuclear or whatever. You know, you can get an LCOE value for any type of energy generation and see if it's a good investment or not, or see which one is the better investment. And so, you know, obviously, like we said, in this case, the land-based one is still a better investment by about 20%. But you could also compare this to a floating wind turbine or a gas plant or something like that. The cool thing about having this number, so I did some calculations here, and with this LCOE being somewhere between 32 and 56, 56 being the worst one and 32 being the best one, compared to the value of solar, which is 72.40, in the city of Austin, the way that they credit you for building solar is kind of interesting. And I know it's different for every utility, but the way that they do it in Austin is depends on the size. So system size under 1 megawatt. And remember this, this one in Giddings, Texas was 0.99 megawatts. So they're probably using a similar system where they get a better value for smaller systems, just under 1 megawatt, 9.91 cents. And then for systems with greater than 1 megawatt, like we were looking at an example of 10 megawatts, so 7.24 cents per kilowatt hour. So all I did was I converted from cents per kilowatt hour to dollars per megawatt hour, and it becomes $72.40 per megawatt hour. Now that's what the utility is going to credit you for the solar power that you generated. In this case, say $37.8 per megawatt hour is the cost that it would cost you to generate power on a floating solar array in Austin. So we got 37.8. I'm going to take this initial investment of 12.9 million minus this 71.8 debt, 12.8 times 1 minus 71.8, I said. So 3.6 million, that's your upfront investment. LCOE 37.8, system size 10 megawatts, annual yield, this one, 1527. I was doing a calculation for the other side before, so I have to change these numbers. So this is your margin. This is how much are you going to make every year if you take your value of solar, which is what the utility is paying you, and you subtract out the LCOE, which is on average what it's gonna cost you to generate the power. With this system, this 10 megawatt system, accounting for all your debt, taxes, operations, everything, you're gonna make at the end of the year estimated $528,000, which is pretty cool. I mean, ROI 14%. But the thing is, that's on this $3.6 million investment. You need a huge investment and a huge construction plan to start up. It said on some of these projects take about 6 months to build before they start generating electricity. So actually multiple years of permitting and then about 6 months of actual construction to build the system. The problem is these things last about 25 years. And after 25 years, the residual value of the system is zero. These calculations don't include like buying land. I think they assume that you lease the land for 25 years. Of course, it's possible that the system still generates power after 25 years, but for the sake of the calculation, actually, no, I think it was 30 years. Yeah, so they calculated this over 30 years. So after 30 years, they're assuming that the solar panels will be just dead, useless, or not worth continuing to operate, and you'll replace them. That's that. They even took into account annual PV degradation right here. I think it's a pretty complete model. It's way more in depth than anything I've ever seen before, so that's cool. Here's what I got as a comparison between buying this $10 million solar thing versus investing your $3.6 million in the S&P 500. You can see how much profit you would have at the end of each month or year, and the big difference. So the big difference why, even though S&P 500 I'm putting as a 7% return, and this has a 14% return, in this case you don't get to keep your principal. You have to spend it all to build the system, and then you start generating 14% back. You don't get 14% on top of your $10 million $13 million that you initially invested. I don't know exactly how they calculated the debt, but it says debt turn 18 years. So maybe after 18 years, you've paid off the entire debt, and then your returns kind of go up after that. I'm not 100% sure how they did the model. And to be honest, I looked at this equation, but yeah, where does the debt term end in here? I'm not really sure. I don't see it as depreciation, debt, interest. Here's principal, interest is over here. Yeah, so these look like they're all going from n-1 to n, which is, it doesn't actually say, but I have to assume, it seems like they are saying that every year is the same. Yeah, so these debt, interest, and debt payoffs don't change after year 18. So I'm not sure how this 18 years comes into effect. But it's not like the first 18 years you're paying off more of the loan, and then the next 12 years you're free and clear and just generating a lot more profit. I don't think that's the case. Yeah, I'm actually kind of curious now, because that seems like it makes a big difference. Anyways, at 10 years, you're still slightly behind the S&P 500. Actually, I think you don't ever catch up to it with this ROI. When I was doing it for the land-based solar at 10 years you've caught up and you're actually ahead of the S&P 500 investment. Yeah, it's close. It's actually, for the land-based one, that's really great. But this is also including that government incentive, 26% off the total cost, which is a pretty big incentive, right? But hey, that's awesome. If you can leave your money in there for 10 years and you want to help the environment, I guess this is a reasonably good investment now. And I really like this calculation because it makes it super simple for me to understand. And I could also check some of the assumptions I had. And this is like, okay, so this is the big assumption here is, right, like how much energy are you actually going to get? They used this number because it's the median for the country. You're probably not going to build a solar panel in the worst place to build solar panels. So saying that you're going to build it in the median is probably more like the worst case scenario. You're going to put solar panels in places where it's really hot and sunny. So you could, if you wanted to, bump this up and see what happens. Like, of course, before you build the system, you'll do a better analysis of the target area that you're going to build it in, and then you will hopefully make it a better investment. But actually, when I calculated this turns out to be something like 4.3 hours per day of, a full panel use. So like the way I used to think about it was, say you have a 10 megawatt system, how many megawatt hours per day are you going to get out of that? It's roughly like 4 hours per day. I haven't looked at industrial size. This is like what I've heard from people who have it on their rooftops. It's around 4 hours per day. This number actually comes out to 4.3 hours per day. Basically, like this system would generate 43 megawatt hours per day. So if you bump it up, let's just do it. Let's say we make it 20. Is 20% higher ridiculous? Okay, let's say we find a place to build that has 10% more, and see how that changes our investment. Yeah, I don't know. I guess it gives you 10% more dollars per day, right? Something like that, from 528 to 581. Yeah, I mean, with this model where the utility just pays you for the amount that you generate. Yeah, 10% more power, almost exactly 10% higher. Okay, so for this model where the utility just pays you back a fixed amount for the amount of power you generate, adding 10% more power gives you 10% more profits. Yeah, it's still not as good as the S&P 500, still doesn't cross after 10 years. I guess it's reasonably close. So at the end of the day, I guess it's not quite as good as just leaving your money in the stock market, but it does do good for the world. It's an interesting project, and there is a potential upside if you find the place that gets way more sun than the median, then you can make it work, and also benefit from preventing algae bloom and evaporation in these drinking water situations. So one more thing that I wanted to look through is how much water actually evaporates from a reservoir in a year. Is that really an important thing to think about? So basically I just Googled like how many gallons of water evaporates from a reservoir in a year, and the best thing that I could find was this report done by Texas Water Development Board, and this is May 2021. And what they did basically was they monitored more than half of the reservoirs in the state of Texas and calculated how much evaporation was lost from all of those, and tried to make a prediction about how much the entire state lost in evaporation, or try to predict like how much an individual reservoir would lose over a year of evaporation. The problem is the numbers they use. They say during the period of 2001 to 2018 range from 5.85 to 7.96 million acre feet, with an average value of 6.88 million acre feet of evaporation. So what the heck is acre feet? I can't even believe this is a thing that they do. So after reading through their methodology, it kind of makes sense why they do this, and it's really frustrating and dumb. But the reason they do it this way is because it's just easier to measure this way. And then you have to be an engineer to figure out what that actually means in gallons. But basically, why is it acre feet? Because the size of the surface area of the reservoir is measured in acres, which changes depending on how high or low the water is, because as it gets higher, the lake actually becomes bigger, so there are more acres, and they have charts for every reservoir that says, like, if it's this deep, we've calculated that the surface area is this many acres, and if it's this deep, then it's this many acres, and so they know that already. And then they just measure the height difference every day, or at the beginning and end, or whatever, whenever they measure the height difference. And so they know how many feet it changed. So it went down, say you have a reservoir that is 6.88 million acres, and it went down 1 foot, then that's 6.88 million acre feet. They probably have, I don't know what the resolution on the size of the on the surface area tables are, but if it's tighter than a foot, they can like integrate over the whole foot or whatever. But basically, so basically, in very simple terms, like, how many acres is the total surface area and how many feet did the level drop, and then they multiply those two numbers together to get acre feet, and then somebody has to go and figure out how many gallons that actually is. So let's see if we can do that. Okay, so we have acre feet 6.88 or 6.88 acre feet, 43560 feet, square feet. So whatever that means. So that means an acre foot is 43,560 cubic feet. So now cubic feet to gallons is 7.48. So there are 7.48 gallons in a cubic foot. So like this much is, that seems like a lot. Really? This is 7 gallons? That feels like about 2 or 3 gallons. But okay, if you say so. 1 acre foot is equal to this times this. Total evap loss is equal to this times this times this in gallons. 2 times 10 to the 12, what is that? Trillion gallons? $2 million gallons. 2 trillion gallons in the state of Texas lost in 1 year to evaporation. Okay, that's a lot. How much? Okay, so say we go back to this like 1 megawatt size thing. How much water is that actually covering? Maybe we should do our 10 megawatt thing. What is the size of a 72 cell panel? Has 450 watts and measures 80 by 40 inches. Why is everything in different units? This is literally the only reason engineers exist, to convert units. Okay, so we have, so say our 10 megawatt system has how many panels? Equals 10 divided by 450, 22,000 panels of these 72 cell panels that are 80 by 40, and one panel in square feet equals 80 over 12 times 40 over 12 is, oh, weird how that works. Okay, so there's 22 square feet per panel. We need 22.222 thousand of them. So total square foot of panel equals this times this. 493,000 square feet. And then if I'm looking at like this thing, there's a lot of gaps between them. So I'm gonna add in like 20% extra empty space of to get the total area of the floating part, how much water is actually covered by this thing. So extra floating area is 1.2. I'm gonna just say 20% as a guess. Okay. Let's see. What else? Okay, so the total area of our system will be this times this, 590,000 square feet. So we could convert that to acres. But I want to know, that's how many acre feet evaporated in a year. But it doesn't say what the total surface area was. Okay, so this is the total acre feet, precipitation, total surface area, and then I'm guessing this is just this divided by this. 6.88 divided by 1.46. 4.7. That's 4.57. Okay, not sure how they got that. But anyway, that's pretty close. Okay. So let's see. So we're saying the average surface area is 1.46 million acres, and that means this much evaporation. So if I take this in gallons divided by this in acres, million acres. Oh, this is million acre feet. Okay. Then I'll have the number of gallons per acre that evaporates in a year, right? Okay. So gallons per acre evaporation per acre per year, really, equals, let's see, where's my total gallons divided by, what did we say, 1.46? Okay, so now we are predicting about 1.5 million gallons per acre evaporating. An acre is like this many feet, so we have roughly 15 acres or something. Let's say total area of system in acre. $13 acres for our system. So gallons saved from evaporation equals 20 million gallons of water. I don't know, how much does a gallon of water cost? What does a gallon of water cost? I don't know, like, what does it actually cost them to lose it, not how much do they charge for it. But I guess how much could they potentially charge for it? Let's see. City of Austin charges oh god. Okay, so it's not even linear. It's let's just take the middle number. $3.35 per 1,000 gallons. So value of water is this times 3.35 divided by 1,000 in dollars, $60,000 a year. Okay, so equals this divided by this, an extra 13%. So what you stand to gain by saving all that evaporating water adds about 13% to your bottom line, I guess. Okay, so it's something. It's not that much, but it's something. But say you are these guys, the Altman plants, and they use a ton of water. It actually costs you more if you use more water. So the highest level, if you use 70,000 gallons or more, it's $4.35 per 1,000 gallons. So maybe, well, theirs is like 1/10 of the size. So maybe they're saving like $9,000 a year on their water bill in addition to what they're saving on their electric bill. I think for that 1 megawatt system, like that seems like it makes a lot of sense. They are saving, well, let's redo it real quick. 1 megawatt, and then the margin is this is 99.4. So they are saving, yeah, this is still wrong, but they're saving 94,000 a year on their electric bill, and then another 9,000 on their water bill. Pretty cool. Pretty cool, I guess. You save like 10%. Yeah, you pay like 20% more. You pay 20% more for your system, but you save 10% on your water bill by not evaporating all that water. It comes out still 10% more expensive, but if water is really precious or hard to come by, then it makes a lot of sense. And overall, it's great for the environment. So I think it's a win-win. Unfortunately, it's still a little bit more expensive than doing nothing, and doing nothing is always easier than doing something. So this is a little bit disappointing, but it's cool that we can see the numbers and see that it's actually pretty close to being a winner. I like it.